the weird thing I think perfectionism is that perfection isn't success, right? Perfectionism is truly selfish in some ways, right? We get so focused on ourselves and not the other person. What typically happens is I start to prepare, or I get that mindset of, oh my God, I care about this big thing. I want to have it go perfectly, right? There's no expectation on me to be perfect in this moment, right? I can just be myself, and that is more than enough.
Hello, everyone. I am Hannah Bloking.
Hi, I'm Allison Makalik, and you have joined us for another episode of 4 Under 3's Imposter Talks. So, Hannah, I know we've recorded a lot today, but when these come out, obviously they won't be all in order. But you gave the best overview of what Imposter Talk is. Can you do a quick rendition of that again? I loved it.
Yes, so I will do my best, but I earlier referred to this as my weekly medicine. And really what it is Allison and I have the privilege of having this amazing network of really just phenomenal professionals and individuals. And we are grateful that we are able to recruit amazing guests like the one that we're about to introduce you to. And really what we do every single week is we facilitate discussions around this topic that seems to resonate so much with so many different people and for so many different reasons, which is imposter syndrome. So really excited about this particular episode today. So we're trying to be really, vulnerable to open it up for our guests. So tell me, what is a moment this week that you really had to fight your imposter syndrome?
Oh, I've had a lot all the time, obviously. I'd say today we have a heavy recording day today, and it's with people that I trust and respect, and it's kind of intimidating. And so I've kind of felt it kind of pop up before every single time we record. So then I have to remind myself, I know what we're doing. Our passion is to talk to people, like we got this, but it's almost like a check-in. So I used to think feeling like an imposter was like a daily thing. And I'm like, oh no, it's like hourly sometimes. So that's and that's okay. That's okay. What about you?
Oh my goodness. I think one of the things that we learn is like introductions are really hard when you have imposter syndrome. And, I manage a team, and one of my team members in a meeting with a group of people that we hadn't worked with before introduced me as their boss. And that just made a light go off in my brain because it's technically true.
I
But
know.
just wild. But yeah, but I really had to embrace it and then do my introduction. So without further ado, we have an amazing guest. So Allison, you just have the best network. Let's dive right in.
Yes. I think connecting with humans is my superpower. And this connection actually came from friends of friends of friends. And today we have Mr. Myron Isaiah Bryant. He actually has his own podcast called C3. And Myron, I do want you to tell everyone about that. But basically, how this introduction came was a woman that Hannah, Connie, one of my good friends. She was actually on Myron's podcast. And I was like, wait, I want to be on the podcast. That sounded so much fun. And so I reached out and I said, actually, I think you'd be a fantastic guest on our podcast too. So it's a lot of like podcast love here and really sharing the wealth and sharing the knowledge. And I did have the great honor of being on Myron's podcast last week, and he's fantastic. So I'm really excited for our audience today to jump in. And then, like Hannah said, without further ado, introduce yourself, please, sir. Tell everyone who you are and how you came to be.
Well, I'm just thankful to be here. The podcast love is real. We're all in the pod together. As you mentioned, Allison, Hannah, my name's Myron Isaiah Bryant. Allison and I have worked together in previous roles there at the same organization. And we also have a familiar friend, Connie, who was on my podcast just 2 or 3 months ago. And Allison on my podcast last week there. And yeah, it's an amazing connection of humans, and really just excited for today's conversation. So
Awesome. Thank you. I like to call it our podcast fam. As we keep doing this, we keep meeting people. I'm like, oh, come on ours. Look for yours. It's great.
right. Hey, everyone has a podcast these days.
Yeah. So how did you, start C3? What does it stand for? How did you get to where you are in your career?
Yeah. So I've been in tech sales for about oh my God, I thought I'm getting old. 8 years now. Before that, I sold, fun fact, HVAC fans.
For launch.
It's the weird
Yeah.
things, oh man, I mean, it's a separate podcast to talk about all the things. But no, I've been in tech for about 8 years now, and I've had a few different roles, right? So everything from BDR, which is inside sales or initial, intro sales for people not really familiar with tech, to full sales cycle of an AE. That took some time to learn how to be successful and help our customers, see value in doing post sales success, storytelling, i.e., solutions engineering, and then came back in a sales role, and then now a sales leader here. So a few different roles across my career. What I saw both on a professional and personal standpoint of just life is that we have all these kind of blinders and walls up of how we segment people. And to Allison's point there, it really is a superpower just to be able to connect with humans. So C3 is a podcast that talks about values, each person's values, agnostic of their role, how those values have shown in their roles and how they may be successful within that. So we have different people across entrepreneurs, high performers, leaders, all the different roles kind of talk about their journey, their why, and their values.
Amazing. I can't wait to go this up and listen afterward. I'm really talking about a shared passion, not only for past, but just for the topic of connecting humans. The topic that we really dive into is sort of specific, and it's around this idea of imposter syndrome and imposter phenomenon. Through these discussions, we realize that almost everybody has it, but it means something different to everybody for different reasons.
Yep.
So, maybe our first question to you, tell us a little bit about what does imposter syndrome mean to you?
Yeah, for me, for imposter syndrome, I love Allison's kind of analogy for a startup of, hey, every time you hop on a podcast, it kind of shows up. Or for me, it could be similar podcast before today for customer calls. If you have big customer calls, if you're going to something big where I care about it a lot, and I kind of give myself, for lack of a better word, perfectionism, right? I have this idea of who I need to be versus who I am, and that delta of the reality of Myron versus this perfect Myron that I want to project, that is where I think the imposter syndrome grows from, is me just thinking I have to be someone I'm not. And it's a great opportunity to remind ourselves at every moment that it comes up because we show that we care about something. We care about our podcast, we care about our customer calls, we care about whatever it may be that it shows up. But it's also an opportunity to be caring for yourself to say, hey, though I care about this, there's no expectation on me to be perfect in this moment, right? I can just be myself, and that is more than enough.
That's so funny you said perfectionist because in our workshop that Hannah and I do, some people say, "Oh, I've never felt like an imposter." And we say that it creeps up in sneaky ways. One of the 5 ways that there's actual studies about is perfectionism, being that
Yeah.
perfectionist. And I liked how you said, I feel like I have to be this way, but this is how I really am, and kind of mirroring that to
Yeah.
become your authentic self. It's hard. It really is. Everyone thinks, "Oh, I'm cured." No, 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 honey, this is not a cure. Like, this is a lifetime of overcoming these feelings. So, on that, can you give us an example of something recent or something that's really stood out in your mind where you're like, okay, this is an example and I've really felt it. And then what you did?
Yeah. I'd say for me, I think events with customers is the big thing, right? We have customer events
Mm,
in our day job here where, and especially now, I think where we're all so remote, it's almost even more. And this is where I think the imposter syndrome kind of really shows its head, things that we don't do often. And it's probably connected to that whole
yes.
perfectionism things. I haven't done this thing in a while. I don't know what I feel like when I do this. I don't know what's expected of me when I'm doing this, right? So in-person events are things, as we've seen the past couple of years, that have been more important now than ever. But there was a while that just was not happening. Right. So
Yes.
as we're all coming outside a bit more as well, going to in-person event, meeting different customers, you're like, what suit should I wear? Does my suit even still fit? I've gotten caught by that before as I get older. Does my suit even still fit? Is this still a style? What does this person care about? Like, how do I prepare for it? So there's all these questions in your head. Some of them are helpful. Some of them are just kind of that rumination of perfectionism. And it's kind of that, I think, awareness or mindfulness of, hey, how can I show up authentic to myself and make sure I'm showing up prepared? But also just be myself and don't put that pressure on myself to be perfect, because that's never something that would there.
I love so much of what you just said. And, one of the things that we talk a lot about in our workshops is just around reframing how you start to talk to yourself. And you have done such an eloquent job of talking about how these things that pop up in your mind when you're preparing for these big events and it's post-COVID and you now have to look at your wardrobe and all these crazy things. But you gave a couple of examples, but I would love to hear just like truly how you execute that mindfulness and you're able to separate out the not helpful questions and push them aside and really focus on those constructive ones.
Yeah, I think I'm still growing in that, right? What typically happens is I start to prepare, or I get that mindset of, oh my God, I care about this big thing. I want to have it go perfectly, right? I'm asking myself, hey, how can I show up prepared? How can I make a good impression? What does success look like? What do I want to wear? How do I execute on this thing? And at some point of me asking 1,000 questions, I'm like, wait, what question am I on again? And that's usually what I'm asking too many questions. So for me,
Oh,
really,
yeah.
it's that mindfulness of, hey, what does success look like? What do I want the experience to be? And what's my intentionality of that? And whenever I can come back and anchor in that, whether you call that a value, whether you call that just what does quote unquote success look like in that event or that call, whatever that is, anchoring in that clearly kind of gets me away from the imposter syndrome because the weird thing I think perfectionism is that perfection isn't success, right? Perfectionism is truly selfish in some ways, right? We get so focused on ourselves and not the other person, the other people in that experience that coming back and just saying, hey, I want to show up and have a great podcast, Allison and Hannah. I want to have a great conversation about imposter syndrome and have a good impact. I can anchor in that mindfully whenever I get these other questions, like, I don't want to pay attention to that because I know I'm here to do this thing. As long as I'm doing this, I'm successful.
That is awesome. I know we talked about mindfulness a lot on C3. Do you want to share any tips for how you do your mindfulness exercises?
Yeah, there's a bunch of different ways to do them. What works for me personally in the morning, journaling is probably one of the best things you can do, right? I know people feels like an old thing to say, oh, bring out your journal. You can do it with apps. It could be on your iPhone or
Yeah.
Android app.
Okay.
Day One, right? I use Day One on my phone as well. That's great. There's mindfulness apps. Headspace is what I use for meditation or mindfulness. There's a bunch of different ways you can do it. I've done yoga a ton in the past if I've needed it. As I talk a lot about on the podcast, I go to therapy. I've been going for 6 or 7 years. So there's a ton of ways to do it. I would even throw in working out. There are some days, like I've had days early this week where it's like all I wanted to do after work was go for a quick walk or run. And that was quote unquote mindfulness for me because it allowed me to get out
Mhm.
of my own head, start, working through things and understand, hey, what should I do to navigate certain things in life there? So ton of different practices. I would just say for anyone sticking to something for a while, seeing what works for them, and then trying to be as present as possible is kind of the start to that practice.
I love that so
I
much.
think,
The sticking with something for a while, not trying too many strategies on pick one thing, try it for a few months and really be able to see how it's helped growth.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
yeah. And one thing that's amazing in talking to so many different people, and I'm sure you experience the exact same thing, it's like something that works so well for the most successful person you've ever met doesn't work for another incredible leader. They're like nothing. So I think people get frustrated and they're like, oh, it's just not for me. It'll just take you under, especially in tech sales, especially when you're
Yep.
presenting, especially when you're in front of other people. So I think what I was really inspired talking to you and just learning from you, it's no, no, no. This is not a should you. This is a must do, people. Like,
Yep.
let me shout it from the rooftop.
Yep. Yep, and I love that perspective as well, and the word I anchor that in is practice, right? And that gets, again, away from
Mhm.
imposters, it gets away from the perfectionism, is that if anyone who's ever been an athlete or a musician, you practice, and some days you're gonna feel great, and then there's days where if you're, a decade, multiple decades into being an artist or, an athlete, it just doesn't feel right. That's okay, you still show up and do it, and you know that long term, it's gonna continue to be helpful, so I think that gets me out of that perfectionism standpoint is like just anchoring, I'm going to practice this. I have no expectation that it's going to be perfect today. I'm just doing it because I know that helps me as well.
Oh my goodness.
Beautiful.
Well,
Mm.
Myron Isaiah Bryant, it has been 3 ounce as wonderful as Allison said that you would be. And it's been such a pleasure to have you on today. I
Thank
know
you.
I'm personally inspired by your talk, and I'm really excited to go out and check out the podcast.
Yeah. And if you have any questions for Myron, just add them and we'll post this on LinkedIn and of course all the other fun channels. But I just think I'm really grateful that we met and I'm really grateful that we've been able to have these like real human to human conversations. So Thank you for inspiring us. Thank you for inspiring your audience. I'm so excited for our audience to meet you. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Imposter Talks.
Subscribe, like, and review our podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And please follow us on LinkedIn and YouTube at 4under3.
And we want to hear your imposter story. If you're interested in being a guest, please email us at info@4under3.io. Thanks so much.